yeah, it might be if you're running it inside your organization that hopefully then your security department will start trampling into your room and say like, "Hey, you're not supposed to do this." If they don't, well, you apply the Terraform. Have a conversation with your security people. Excellent idea.
Welcome to the DevSec For Scale podcast, the show that makes security a first-class citizen for growing companies. Welcome back, everyone, to the DevSec For Scale podcast. Today, again with me is Jeroen Willemsen. And Jeroen, last time we spoke about the trends around OWASP secrets management, OWASP security in general, as well as secrets management more, specifically. And I wanted to now touch this time on the WrongSecerets project, which we made a small mention of last time. And the WrongSecerets project is a really cool way for users to get a real feel, hands-on feel for a real environment, and to be able to understand what it means when you have secrets issues and you have challenges that you created for users. So can you give us a little bit about the background and the fact that you're now supporting, all those, other types of environments, Heroku, Octeto, FlyIO, Azure, GCP, AWS, et cetera. So tell us a little bit about WrongSecerets and this multi-cloud environment setup that you have.
Of course. So thanks for being back. So we started out with setting up this the secret challenges, as in things we saw in the wild, right? That could possibly go wrong. Like a year ago, where we just mostly focused on, hey, what could go wrong when you put stuff in Docker, GitHub, or in Kubernetes? And then quickly the question, of course, became like, okay, but what about your cloud provider? Okay, let's first model this for AWS. And then people came to us like, that's very interesting. Does this also hold for Azure? Does this also hold for GCP? Well, obviously it does. We just need to show you. So we started making it multi-cloud for multiple environments. And then soon the amount of questions started growing. Like, okay, but how about, hiding stuff in binary and stuff like that? Or what about modern Web3 smart contracts? So that way the challenges kept growing. But at the same time, people wanted to have easy access. So while we have the 3 cloud providers really to show what could go wrong inside those clouds, we have the 3 other providers like Fly.io, Octeto, and Heroku to basically allow people to jump in quickly. Because some people have trouble running Docker locally for some reason, or have trouble running Kubernetes Minikube setup locally. So then using these services, we can allow them to at least do the Docker and the Kubernetes challenges, so they can get a feeling for, that's why I shouldn't do this, basically. Just as a simple starter, basically.
And so, this basically gives any developer or anyone that wants to just try it to find where there are issues in terms of secrets around any of their environments, whether it's in, a YAML file somewhere, whether it's in some other script, whether it's, just kind of out in the open on some GitHub repo.
Exactly.
So we're talking a bit about the multi-cloud idea that you have here. What would you recommend in terms of following the multi-cloud strategy? And, when does that improve, let's say, resiliency of an organization versus what it could cause, somewhat negatively, versus the negative impacts that it might have?
So for multi-cloud, it means you need to have knowledge, not just for one cloud, but for multiple clouds, like, multi-cloud strategy. And not just how do I make it work, but also how do I secure this? And when you start off thinking like, we always run on AWS and secrets manager, this is the way how to do it. Now we're going to deploy a similar thing to Azure Key Vault. You'll find out it's different, but you might find out a little bit too late during your first major incident. Right. So apparently you need more knowledge, which also means you need more people, or possibly, overworked people that have knowledge of both clouds to actually secure that stuff. So before you go multi-cloud for means of resilience, it might be a very good idea to first have a control of your cloud you're currently in. And when you start multi-cloud, make sure you do the same thing for the next cloud. And if it's for resilience because you want to change strategies in order to make it harder for an attacker to understand what to do next, that might be very worthwhile. But if you don't trust the cloud vendor to survive, there is a large chance the cloud vendor will live longer than your company does. So it might not make sense for that to move multi-cloud. And when we started this project off first on AWS, it was all like fun and games, but we didn't touch Azure that much. But we did touch GCP a lot. But now during upgrading, we found out that every time you upgrade a Kubernetes version, every of the cloud vendors will give you different type of work to resolve, because they have decided to do something different. And that different can be very nasty. So before you know what to do, you again need more resources to actually be able to do something very, well, supposedly trivial, like moving to a newer Kubernetes version.
Well, that I mean, should be in principle a simple update command, right? Upgrade command, right? Not should.
Yes.
So, well, all right. So in terms of again continuing on that, sort of security track, we're talking about multi-cloud. What would you recommend as like first steps? Let's say just to secure one cloud environment, not all of them. Let's just say you're talking about the one that you have that you're starting with, let's say AWS, whatever it is. What are some recommendations you have there?
So my first recommendation would just to make it work because we have nothing to secure. We don't have business running. So before we say like, oh, you're not supposed to use this rule or whatever, let's just first make sure you have something working before you start securing. When you start securing, start with IAM. As in whether that's the roles and responsibilities defined in your AD and Azure, or whether you're on AWS and AWS IAM is your fun and games place. Just start over there. Start. Well, like jokes we made earlier before the call, look for stars and replace them with actual resources, replace them with actual operations you need. So that you can at least tie down to something useful. And then you can see like, hey, do we still have a toxic combination left? As in, is somebody who's supposed to be able to just consume resources also able to create new policies so we can escalate? Or is there another way to do other things? Once you get that figured out in policy level, then let's start hardening. Because once you get the policy level defined properly, you can already reduce impact a lot at many places in terms of, hey, let's assume somebody was able to get to this role. What can he do? Well, if it's not star, it shouldn't be too much. But if you give star everywhere, you're gonna, it's going to be a water hose. There's no end to it. And then once you did first your IAM parts, then start looking at hardening whatever you run inside the cloud as a workload. Of course, you should do both. You shouldn't stop at the IAM level. I think that's a very insecure idea. But the hardening game is a continuous thing because whatever software lives over there needs to be continuously patched, blah, blah, blah. But let's start with just understanding what do you have running, where do you have it running, and what access privileges does that actually require before we run into anything else.
Absolutely. So let's go back to the WrongSecerets project and talk a little bit about that. Having a look at sort of like that, the Terraform that you guys are using to spin up the environment and all that. It seems like a pretty simple, basic type of, nothing spectacular. So would you think that this is a great way for people to sort of, get started if they wanted to go ahead and start using it?
Yeah, I think if you use a Terraform, you can really have a low-cost environment. So we use managed nodes with low performance parameters because you just run a single Spring Boot application in there, nothing really fancy. And the nice thing is if you've never done any cloud project, feel free to just copy it and start from there onward if you want to have some managed Kubernetes environment inside the cloud. Because we are still patching it and trying to keep it as a relatively basic, secure thing. One thing to do note, if you're using this, make sure you have a clean account where you have admin rights, because otherwise you might end up because your organization policies might say like, oh, you're not supposed to do this. Because one of the challenges, for instance, is doing IAM privilege escalation. So in every 3 clouds, we made some insecure, funny thing that allows somebody to jump from one role to another in a way that is specific to that given cloud. The cloud provider. So it might be if you're running it inside your organization that hopefully then your security department will start trampling into your room and say like, hey, you're not supposed to do this. If they don't, well, you apply the Terraform. Have a conversation with your security people. Excellent idea.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. So it's obviously that's one of the things we see in general. Also along the lines of the previous mention of having anywhere you have a star, you better replace it with something more specific. I also had a conversation recently with a friend in the security side and said the same thing. Said more DevOps side, and he just said, everyone at the end of the day just kind of gets a little bit upset and angry and frustrated with the work they're trying to do, and they can't have the right permissions ever, and they all just end up putting a star and just say, you know what, give everyone access. Let's open up the environment and just get it done. And then it's like, okay, well, I guess it's okay to do it for like a minute or two while you get in there and finish what you need to do, but then we have to put it back to what it was, right? And then they go, oh well, I forgot to tell our admin to actually change it back. So I guess you just kept it open now for anyone. And so same thing with obviously running a Terraform script. Obviously, you have to have all the right permission profile for that to run as well. So going forward, a little bit about the challenges with the WrongSecerets project. Again, I'll link to the project in the show notes as well. And it's an open source project. Of course, anyone can join, and people can also give back. Right? They can feel free to add code, push as well, and of course you'll review it and all that. So you're obviously adding new challenges constantly and things like that. So, I know you have like for, Git, Docker, Kubernetes, of course, other, clouds as well for secrets management applications. What made you include, let's say, any of those challenges, or what makes you want to include newer challenges? And would that mean that like Nomad or Heroku itself are safe for this, or is it just like KeePass that has password issues or something else?
So we mostly added challenges based on what we saw in the wild. And when, in conversations like these or at meetups or conferences, people told us like, hey, have you ever seen this or that? Like, for instance, the latest issues that have been filed from the OWASP Stammtisch in Germany, where we had a meeting about this project, and they said like, hey, have you ever, for instance, seen people asking for support, and they're saying like, hey, it's not working because my API key seems to be broken. This is my API key, secret API key right there in the comment. And then the operator will go like, oh, that is the wrong key. Have you tried secret API key right there in the ticket? With then the conclusion of the other guy, yes, this works. Please close this ticket. These sort of things. I was like, would anybody be dumb enough? Oh, yes, I saw in customer X and Y, actually too, I saw this happen literally. Oh yeah, that's actually a great challenge to add. So this is one of the things being listed to be added. So most of these things are coming from the wild. Now, given that we are mostly a Kubernetes stack, because that was basically how we started developing, we haven't looked enough into Nomad, for instance, to put the same thing over there. But the same thing holds over there. If wrong policies are configured for your Nomad workload, you can also still, get whatever secrets is out there. It's similar as Kubernetes. It's just based on different principles. But the same problems apply there. Now, for Heroku, we have something like Heroku Secrets, which you can, of course, also put in Git to have something as infrastructure as code, as how you would, or how some people explain infrastructure as code will be, by hard coding all the definitions of your Heroku deployment, including the secrets you need to get. So you end up with the same thing as Kubernetes. We just didn't create a specific Heroku challenge yet because we figured like, if we do that, wouldn't we then now require people to run all the environments next to each other? So that's why we haven't included it. But unfortunately, it's the same problem. And with, for instance, regarding the passwords, we for instance, the password managers, we included KeePass because it's open source. But if somebody at operator or at admin level is able to reduce the minimum password strength requirement for his users in 1Pass or in a LastPass or 1Password or whatever, you end up with the same problem. If you can, have a weak password to your password manager, you end up with the same problem. So yeah, it's unfortunately all insecure, but we sometimes just need to make choices on which platform to support. Otherwise, if somebody needs to do the journey through all the challenges, he can either never finish because he doesn't have a license to password manager, whatever, or he needs to spin up so many environments in parallel that will be a drag. But what might be interesting actually is, for instance, for the Kubernetes challenge now to think of it is, hey, if we detect you're running on Heroku, let's switch one of the Kubernetes challenges into a Heroku challenge. As in, hey, the same thing applies over here. Can you find the secret? That's actually quite interesting. I'll take that as an issue later on in the GitHub project.
I'm actually interested. Have you really followed? Is there any way for you to follow statistics of users and how many users you've had using it, how far they've gotten? If there's like one or two challenges that are sort of like the most used because they feel like it's like the easiest. Has anyone tried like the really hard challenges and successfully found them, and passed them?
So we only have those statistics when we run CTFs because we don't try to track our users too much. We do see, for instance, if you go to, for instance, the Heroku instance and we'll show the links later, of course, WrongSecerets.herokuapp.com. If you go to stats, you can see the amount of online users currently using it, and the same holds for the WrongSecrets at Optito and at Fly.io. And what we sometimes see is indeed that there is uh, that let me see if I can currently pop up the amount. So currently
This wasn't planned. This was definitely not even in our planned questions.
No, yeah. So right now we have about 2 active users doing something because we only see when a challenge is being activated. So there is a session set up where score is kept. We don't see specifically all the challenges, but we see the score session being set up, so somebody is playing. So in general, throughout the day, there's mostly one of the 4 environments is up. Like either it's one of the 2 Heroku instances, or it's the Fly, the Dev, or it's the Optito environment. So there is pretty much consumption of it. During CTFs, we can see, of course, targeted who is resolving which flags of CTFD or Facebook CTF. And then we see like the first challenges are often being solved, like the Docker ones and the Git ones. You often see the more red team type of people go straight for the binary because that's what they know and get those resolved. But from there onward, it's actually more of a mixed thing. So depending on whoever is attending the CTF, will go through a certain amount of challenges. But mostly the first challenges get solved rather quickly. The Kubernetes ones get solved rather quickly. Some guys or girls go to the binary ones, and the rest is more like mixed. So it takes a while before they're ever addressed. Actually, only by those people who are persistent, they often just solve everything. So including the password manager settings, for instance.
And you just had a CTF recently. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where that was, how it was, anything interesting, any other things that you gleaned, any gleanings, learnings from that?
Yeah, so we ran it for 2 commercial organizations that didn't want to get their names exposed, so we don't put them on the repo either. Apologies for that. One was with a small party, and one was with at most 200 people. And the first nice thing was that we found out that the setup is really scalable. So you can run, for instance, WrongSecerets itself in CTF mode just on your Heroku deployment or whatever. But then you have a shared instance. Next to that, we made the WrongSecerets CTF party repository, where we have a fully multi-tenant scalable namespace isolated Kubernetes setup with auto-scaling. So every player gets its own namespace with network isolation, namespace isolation, context security, applied everything to it. And in that namespace, you have 2 things. One is a webtop, like your normal Linux webtop with a bunch of things packed in there, so you can actually execute whatever you need to do inside the CTF. And one is an instance of WrongSecrets, so you can start fuzzing that. You can start, breaking it completely down. Because if you would break it, you don't break it for other people. And with the all liveness and readiness checks, blah blah blah. If you really broke it, we'll just delete the pod automatically and give you a new one within your deployment, so you can continue to play. And that showed to be very successful. The company that had a larger group of players, I think, spent about just $14 per day. Because, of course, during a CTF, if you have a multi-day CTF, nobody plays all together. And if they do, it's not like everybody starts spinning up immediately, because people got things to do right next to it. So we could really keep the cost low. And it worked really well. We've asked online for multiple known hackers, like, can you try to break into it? Can you try to break out of it? Can you be annoying to other people's namespaces? So far, not really. The only thing they could do is break their own thing, or break the node, or fill up part of the hard drive on the node where they were running. And then automatically they would get evicted, and the node will be cleaned up. Everybody would go to a different space and just continue playing. So yeah, that was overall pretty interesting Kubernetes security exercise. So if you're listening to this or watching this, feel free to try it out and let us know what you think. Yes, the documentation is not completed yet, but if you just follow the scripts in either the AWS folder, in the main folder, it should be over.
Great. Now, So going back to the project itself, the application has kind of quite a few dependencies, from different ecosystems, of course. There's got Terraform, NPM, Maven, etc. So it's a bit to maintain, and you're not a lot of people. You and Ben,
Yes.
you're two people. You're two people. So how do you how do you maintain them? What's the story there?
So to start off, that's actually pretty hard because you mentioned a few ecosystems here, and some of the assets that we consume within that ecosystem are unstable as correct. Like, yeah, we have a new version. Oh yeah, what we by the way did is, you have to rename the following import to the following thing, and then it might work. And when you do so, all the method calls need to be refactored as well. So, but of course, it starts with knowing that there's an update. So for that, we use GitHub's Dependabot. So Dependabot scans everything. To give ourselves sanity, we keep the default checks of, give us as most 5 assets per ecosystem in a pull per check, and then just create pull requests for us so we can update. And to be honest, the Maven ecosystem, the Spring Boot ecosystem works fairly well. Of course, we only get the main assets inside of our thing, not the transitive dependencies, only the main dependencies, which is good enough for us because otherwise you get breaking, API changes between the transitive dependency and the main. We don't want to go there. And for Terraform, this also works. For NPM, we often just hit the warning limit and say, hey, we have above 5 pull requests ready for you because, whatever happened to your package.json. And then with all the weird changes and immature stuff happening there, for us, it's still an interesting challenge. That actually is consuming most of the time. Well, it actually is just a very small part of our stack. Because, well, we have some examples that run in the front end, and the CTF party is running on mostly on JavaScript dependencies. So there, all the stuff happens continuously. But the rest of the ecosystem, thanks to the Dependabot, is rather easy to maintain. We get monthly updates and patches or notifications. So every month we at least have a minor release upgrade where we made sure everything works with the latest and greatest. But apart from NPM, that's quite some maintenance indeed already.
And you're looking for volunteers who want to join the team, right?
Yeah, if you feel like, hey, I can make this much more simple, and I got some nifty ideas to speed this up without, letting OWASP pay to some commercial vendor 1,000 buckaroonies per month. Feel free to let us know. Come join, or just file a PR. That can already be a huge step forward, right? So we can at least find an alternative if required, and streamline the process furthermore.
And make sure when you put your note in the PR, what you're doing, make sure to say that you heard it on this podcast. So that way we know.
Exactly. That will be awesome. Definitely.
Like put code DevSec, and get a free T-shirt or something. We could talk about that. Do you have T-shirts yet? Do you have swag?
We don't have swag yet. We haven't put time into that. We as you can tell from the amount of code written over the last months, last year, if you look at our flows, we spent a huge amount of spare time on that. That also give us some feedback on our social environments from time to time, to be honest. But we didn't spend time on actually marketing. I'm a content-driven guy. And that also doesn't really help. So I'm very grateful for this podcast to get the word out.
I hope that we can help. I hope that we can help. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll do our best.
Awesome.
We'll just call it a budget issue for now.
Yes. Time budget mostly. Definitely.
So you guys, how long has WrongSecerets been running now?
So for that, I always pop up GitHub because GitHub has this committers graph that speaks the ugly truth about how long this adventure is going on, right? Because it always feels like just a couple of months, but the reality is, well, of course, making some time on popping this up, is that it started as an actual, it started beginning of October last year. End of September last year to become an OWASP project and get revamped. But the actual first iteration of the project, where we had like just 5 challenges to make a point in an all-day DevOps conference, that was in October 2021, I believe. Yeah, 2020. That was in October.
2020. That's 2 years ago. So you're celebrating your 2-year anniversary of that, and you're celebrating your 1-year anniversary of being part of the OWASP umbrella, which is fantastic. So
Actually, yes, exactly. And
so
one big
let's throw a party. We're throwing a party for you here. See?
awesome. Yeah, we got one announcement to make regarding that, and we'll soon make it public over our channels. So right till now, the project has been in my personal GitHub repo, and that makes it to some people feel like it's Jeroen's pet project. Let's not do anything with it because the guy might run off with that. So what we want to do is to make sure that we don't run off with stuff. Is to either put it under the OWASP umbrella GitHub organization or create a WrongSecerets organization where all the different repositories will go to, so that when people feel like I want to contribute, but I don't want to be halfly stashed away behind your name because your name is in the URL, blah blah blah. Then all these things get lifted, hopefully, and make it easier to collaborate without having any doubts about intentions from us wanting to give you a platform to help us out.
That's great. That took a little bit, I think, of my next question, which is probably the last question, which was asking about the future of the project. So we know the repo is now going to be moved probably to a place that's not just under your name. So what are the other things that you have in mind? Do you have like a manifesto or some sort of running document of ideas? What's going to happen, what you're planning in the future?
So most of that is for WrongSecerets itself is inside a GitHub project. So if you go to the GitHub repository, you'll find projects, and there you'll find a project of stuff that we're doing and stuff that we listed and a to-do. Meaning that if you file a ticket, it doesn't mean we necessarily we'll do it, and that it ends up in a to-do column. That means that we see value in it and we really want to get that done eventually. And there's a bunch of things. So one is, of course, the yada paperwork. Thank you, dear, blah, 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 for us running a free service on blah, blah, blah for multiple companies, which I'm now saying a bit awkward, but I'm really grateful for the fact that we can. We just want to, put it in writing properly in a way that everybody knows, like, okay, they can develop this code because, for instance, IDEA helped us with professional IntelliJ licenses on our private computers, so we could speed up the Java development, and that's we're really grateful. But we have to, put these things in. Then there's a bunch of LCM stuff, and then there's a bunch of challenges we want to add, and next to that, we want to make it easier to run it in the future, but also make sure that it remains maintainable so that it doesn't grow all over the place. So that's basically the major directives we're heading off for. And next to that, we already have that secret, the detection testbed. And what we want to do is eventually end up with a bunch of pipelines or GitHub actions running that just show, if you plug in this secret detector, its open source variant, look at the findings that it has, and compare it now to the other ones. Now make your own decision on what you want to do with that. And by that, we hope to just show vendor independently, look, this is what these tools are doing. And if you want to have another commercial tool and the vendor comes to you and says, like, we have the best detection tool in the world, we do much better than whatever, clone our GitHub repository, test it, and compare it to the outcome of the actual GitHub action. So then, we can stop the wally sales and start the actual, hey, this is factual helping you or not at all type of thing. That's what we're mostly aiming for. But all of these will take a lot of time, because for now we first need to wrap up the CTF party to make it clean in terms of documentation and Helm chart and stuff like that, migrate all the things to a proper organization, and then we'll start revving up. That doesn't mean that we are not open to changes of all the things that we just discussed. So if you feel like, oh, Jeroen, if we have to wait for you to finish all that jazz, let me file a pull request. You're more than welcome. In return, we don't have swag. We just mention you in the list of top contributors. And you can put it on your resume and say, hey, I'm an OWASP top contributor for WrongSecerets. Believe it or not, we have people in the top contributor list attesting that it helped in getting their next gig. So feel free to jump around.
Fantastic. Jeroen, thank you so much for your time again. And this is 2 episodes. We still have a 3rd episode coming up, and I hope that we get Ben on this time as well. But we are going to talk a lot more about sort of like the practical aspects of secrets management, multi-cloud strategy, how to put it all together, everything we've talked about until now. And we're going to talk a lot, I think, about sort of like how this can fit into a real a work production environment, and how you can ensure that your strategy around secrets management at least is complete, and not just we implemented this one thing and now we're ready to go, right? So it should be a fun discussion, and hopefully we will get to that soon. But for now, thanks so much for your time. Good luck. Keep it up. And we hope to speak again very soon.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, and have a great week.
And as always, to all the listeners, stay secure. Have a good one.